History Club has been lucky to schedule several guest speakers to talk about various issues related to history and social studies. Recently, we were able to speak to professor and author Michael D. Gambone. He received his doctorate degree from the University of Chicago and is a current professor at Kutztown University. In addition, he is a veteran that served in Iraq. He is the author of over 9 books, with his latest being Modern Conspiracies in America, Separating Fact from Fiction. In the book, Professor Gambone provides case studies of popular conspiracy theories in America from the past 100 years, covering the Protocols and Elders of Zion, Russians and McCarthyism, the Kennedy assassination, 9/11, Sandy Hook, chemtrails, the 2016 election, the 2020 plandemic, QAnon, and the Stop the Steal 2020 election. He has even made a college course that investigates the history of the conspiracies and helps to build a habitual toolkit or critical thinking skills that allow students to challenge these flawed narratives. While we did plan and do plan to organize these interviews and talks into sections to better engage our audience, we have kept this long-form video raw. Professor Gambone approached the talk as more of a back and forth discussion. Multiple topics were discussed briefly and in detail, including JFK, QAnon, Pizzagate, and even election fraud. Thus, we couldn't exactly clip this chat into neat, specific sections since we were all over the place with our talk. We hope you enjoy the talk and check out Professor Gambone's work.
And then hand it over.
Okay. All righty. Thank you.
Yeah, so my name is Mike Gambone, and I teach at Kutztown University. Been here since 1999. I started my career doing Latin American history. So my dissertation's on Nicaragua. And if future me had come back and told me I'd be doing this right now, I wouldn't have believed them. This is like my 3rd or 4th career right now. So I got the idea for the book. It's probably somewhere in the introduction. I had lunch with one of my professors from Penn State. We still talk every year. And she had started doing this course. And I thought, wow, what a great idea. I'm going to steal it. So I did. And I just kind of built it from there and started teaching it at Kutztown in 2016. I'm looking at my enrollments for spring, and right now I have 157 kids enrolled in this class. So the kids love it. And I think their basic reason is everybody has their own favorite conspiracies. I'm curious to see what you guys have, because I know I know one of them is going to be the moon landing, so that's almost a given. I think that's good. Please.
I was going to say, if you see that they're staring straight forward, you're on a big projector, so they're watching you, but not through the camera. But yeah, if you guys want to, what are some of your favorite conspiracies? Flat Earth. Yeah, I heard Flat Earth. That's a solid one.
Flat Earth's a good one. What else do you have?
Porter likes the first Thanksgiving.
Oh, really? How are you framing that as a conspiracy? I'm curious.
I was kidding. Like just how history can be mythologized a little bit.
Oh, okay, because I was going to say, yeah, if you could have settlers conspiring against Native Americans, that's pretty much a given in some of these scenarios. Yeah, I honestly think some of this stuff, like Flat Earth, is just a great example of bad science being misapplied. The chemtrail chapter I wrote is like that. It drives my science majors crazy when we talk about it. But I think, like, jokingly or not, Thanksgiving's interesting because I think you can dig into history and find some real serious conspiracies that exist. One of the topics I added to class this spring was the Japanese American internment. And if you look at how the War Department basically lied to the Justice Department about some of the policies, that ended up in front of the Supreme Court during the war. So you've got official conspiracies that are real that coexist with the crazy ones that we like to laugh at. And I think that's another interesting part of the course in the book that I'd like to talk about a lot. So anybody else have any favorites?
Personally, my favorites are the JFK and MLK assassinations. Those are good ones.
I totally agree. JFK is my favorite. I was being interviewed a couple weeks ago, and I said, it's amazing we spent my lifetime talking about basically about 2 minutes of history. And I don't know if you've ever looked at the Warren Commission or the House Special Committee. my God, what a great place to start research, and talk about how different types of technologies have evolved so we can evaluate the magic bullet. Somewhere buried in the book is a reference to Gerald Posner, who wrote about that. Really good book called Case Closed. Because what you're going to start doing is learning about metallurgy, ballistics, forensics. Nothing I'm an expert in, but it's all part of that story. So, I love the Kennedy stuff, and Martin Luther King by extension, same thing. When you're talking about the authorities that investigate the incident and what their culpability might be, that's really interesting stuff. So far so good, guys.
Oh, we got
please.
The Rothschilds and Bohemian Grove.
No, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you on that one.
He said the Rothschilds and Bohemian Grove.
Believe it or not, when I got married, I actually met some of the Rothschilds. Yeah. Really interesting people. Old money, kind of class. I think take your pick of, everything that's spun off from that to include, the old standards like the Illuminati, the Masonic Lodge conspiracies, that kind of idea of the old elites, turning the screws of authority. Really good thing to read. I'm just going to keep doing this till you guys give up. I'll just keep recommending stuff to read because it's kind of what I do. There's a really good piece that a guy named Richard Hofstadter wrote called The Paranoid Style of American Politics. He wrote that piece in 1964, but he could have written it yesterday. And they actually talk about the groups like the Rothschilds in it. So really good read. So that's a really good one. So, well, let me tell you a little bit about the intro. One of the things I wanted to do was develop a way for people to try to dissect a conspiracy. So when I talk about, like building this toolbox, it's just a way of saying, we needed some kind of method to evaluate, assess, however you want to say it. I think when you guys get out of school and you go on to college and your jobs, that's one of these skills you really need. I mean, it's not just that something that history owns. It's something I think you learn from a good teacher who teaches you how to research. So I always start with the basics. I said, what's the claim, right? So you got to start out with, what are you saying happened? How are you stating it? And sometimes claims get complex, like why was Kennedy assassinated, right? Who's the protagonist? Or are there more than one? And for Kennedy, something like that, there's obviously people have thrown, spaghetti at the wall. So let me ask you that. Who's your favorite conspiracy culprit for Kennedy? Where would you want to start with that?
Go ahead. You say out loud. LBJ.
LBJ, okay. Good. Yeah, I mean, you talk about one of these characters, right? I mean, it's amazing what you read about this guy that's actually true. I mean, it's incredible. So he's the guy that did it. What's the reason? What's the motive?
To enter the Vietnam War.
He wanted to expand the war?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so that's where you kind of have him in cahoots with the Defense Department and the military-industrial complex, and on you go. So, yeah. So you've got, a main culprit and maybe a conspiracy of more than one, which is actually what a conspiracy is. It's not just one person, it's a group or a group of institutions. All right, fair enough, right? So you want to start with that. You got a motive, you got reasons, you got people. Then you got to start talking about proof, right? So whenever I write this on the board, I write claim, and then next to it, I write proof. So that's where you have to start linking things together, right? You got to move from why, what you think happened to how you're going to prove it happened. And that's where these things run into trouble sometimes, because you got to provide some kind of direct link, right? You got to have something there, right? What's also good to know is you have to know the context. So you got to know about LBJ. You have to know about the times. You got to know about the Vietnam War, right? You got to start studying, like a story that starts small but starts to grow. Okay. But all that matters because you need context. You really have to understand that to understand both the culprit and maybe the evidence. So how's that sound? So far, so good? I just got done teaching, so I'm still in that mode. And I don't have a board to write on, so I'm doing the best I can.
Good.
So when I talk about this stuff, the basic elements: claim, proof, context, and then you get into analysis. I mean, how are you judging these things? And one of the points I make to my kids all the time, and I say it's a pretty simple thing. You're treating that audience like a jury, right? And I just got done watching the Darrell Brooks trial, right? Because I was curious about that and evidence and presentation. And the key word is, or the key phrase is, reasonable doubt. And I always say this because we get in these arguments all the time. We say, look, you don't know 100% positive that this happened. That's always true, though, because you're never going to have 100% certainty. You have to decide if all the things you're talking about reach the right threshold, right? That gives you maybe 51% or 60%. You're always going to have doubts, but you got to reach to that level. And I think it's the same when you talk about this stuff. At what point do you reach that's enough? And you're always going to be able to find ways to refine a topic. You look at technology in 1964, looking at the magic bullet, it's going to be incredibly different. You fast forward 20 years, right? And then you fast forward again 20 more years, right? But these are healthy discussions that are helping that percentage evolve because we start learning more, right? I do the Tonkin Gulf incidents in class, and sometimes you're going to have to wait 40, 50 years for something to get declassified. And then you're going to have a whole different, array of evidence you can apply. So these stories always evolve. And when they evolve based on the evidence, that's the best. Okay. Does that make sense? All my future professors? Yeah, we'll see.
That's right.
Hey, you never know. A couple of my students have their PhDs now, so I've already been replaced. That's actually a nice place to be. So good stuff. I'm trying to think about audience, when I look at this, and I guess when I talk about this throughout the book, I kind of took a different attack on what the counterculture is. Have you guys ever talked about that in class, the counterculture? You ever talk about hippies? Do you guys know who the Beatles are?
Yes. Yes.
All right, so you've probably seen the cover of Sgt. Pepper's.
So some heads, yes, some heads, what?
Okay. Yeah, this is Ancient Times of 1967. So a lot of people are going to say, the first time we start challenging authority is when the boomers were in college and they're basically your age almost. They're slightly older. So the late 60s. And I think one of the things that I discovered in the book was that I really think that happened a lot earlier. I think that started happening after World War II. I think it started happening when Joe McCarthy was running amok, denouncing every authority figure he could find. It's amazing when you think about the early 50s. We always think of it as the kind of Ozzie and Harriet suburban utopia. But McCarthy's going after the president, the Secretary of State, the Defense Department, the Army. What he's doing is actively undercutting people's faith in the institutions that were kind of the bedrock of the country. I think that's a starting point. I think by the time you get to Kennedy, people already have doubts. People are already worried about conspiracies. And I think we just took it from there. You talk about the Vietnam War, you talk about Watergate, you get into all the things that happened in the wake of that, the Church Committee. You start looking at, CIA domestic operations. Some of you guys probably know what MK Ultra is, right? Yeah, those are real things, right? And I guess what I'm saying is when you look at the context of the audience, your grandparents were skeptics. Your parents were skeptics because of that. You're skeptics because of them. It accumulates. It's like layers of sediment. So you look at today when somebody throws a conspiracy out there on Twitter.
Oh, are you still there? Jake,
It's not that hard to understand why people are so interested in this stuff.
we lost you for about 8 seconds. It froze.
Well, luckily that was the worst 8 seconds I ever used in class. So no, I think just to loop back, I think conspiracies have accumulated over time to the point where the audience is ready for them, right? I mean, one of my favorite shows when I started teaching was The X-Files. I love that show. So it's on Fox and it becomes part of culture. It's part of, popular discussions. And I'm watching 1899 on Netflix right now, the A.J. Abrams mystery box show. I mean, we love this stuff. I mean, it's very attractive because we love mysteries. We like to try to figure things out. We like to connect dots. It might be about history. It might be about literature or art. But I think there's a lot of reasons why audiences come to this. So that's kind of a long-winded intro, but any questions about that or comments?
Doesn't look like it.
All right. Well, I hope I'm doing okay.
Yeah, you're doing great.
Well, let's talk about Kennedy, because I have a chapter on that, right? Let's focus in on that. That'll be kind of the mainstay of this thing. So when you look at the claims about Kennedy, that somebody killed them, and I think the argument, people have been talking about, they're trying to expand the Vietnam War. That's a pretty good one that I've seen a lot of. If you look at Kennedy's time, he's a cold warrior, right? He's one of the guys actively promoting the war itself. One of the things I point my students at all the time are it's a series of documents called the Pentagon Papers. Right? You guys ever covered that ever? Talked about it? Okay. You can probably find it in any public library. The Defense Department did its own history of the war from 45 to 67, and it didn't release it until a guy named Daniel Ellsberg leaked it to the New York Times, right? So it was actually a secret history for a really long time. And one of the things it really demonstrated was how quickly Kennedy was escalating troop deployments from about 61 to 63. They probably increased by a factor of 20. So I guess the point here is I'm already kind of testing the claim about, why they killed him, because he was, they wanted to expand the war. And I think the premise is a little bit flawed, because if you look at Kennedy himself, he was already doing it. We were already expanding the war pretty rapidly by 63, no question. And Johnson just basically took it from there. So it's an interesting story when you think about his relationship with the military. In a lot of respects, he was giving them what they were asking for, even before he died. So I always point that out because that's kind of part of context, but I'm already kind of testing the evidence, which is what you do here. You're always making the pieces in the formula work together. So does that make sense? And I'll tell you what, if any of you guys are interested afterwards, what I do for a living is create lists of books. If you're interested in that topic or any of the ones, or if you want the syllabus for the class, I'm glad to share it. So if that helps.
It would help.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's talk about, let me ask this, since we're talking about Kennedy, which part of the event, I focus on the magic bullet, but is there a specific part of that you like to look at?
There's some lady that had like a camera, and they never found out who she was. And, like all the footage is on, they can't track it down.
Yeah, I'm having a little trouble hearing you because it's coming through garbled.
You said a lady with a camera that they couldn't find that was in the footage, but I guess not in the footage now? Or are you talking about the Umbrella Man?
No, it's like some lady that had her camera out, and like they wanted to find her for footage, and they never could find her.
Yeah, I think somewhere in the Posner book, he lists the total number of still pictures and videos taken. There was hundreds of pictures taken. So it's in that kind of compendium of evidence. And the Warren Commission ended up with most of it. The problem is they didn't get all of it, because these are tourists with Instamatic cameras and, God help us, 8mm, movie cameras. So are we basically saying they couldn't find her because they basically didn't want to, or what are we talking about here? I'm not clear.
She was pretty close to like right when it happened, like the right place, right time, and they just couldn't track her down.
Now I'm curious to see who the heck that is. Is she actually in the Zapruder film by any chance?
They have pictures of her. They just couldn't find out who she was.
Huh. Yeah, now I want to know that. So hopefully one of you guys, if you have the name, I'd be curious to follow up because I don't know.
You'll have to update the book.
What's that?
Nothing. I said you'll have to update the book.
Yeah, maybe. God knows after the January 6th committee, I'm going to definitely have to. I can't wait till they publish their stuff. Well, I know there was some interest in the elections. Did you guys want to do 16 or 20? The 2016 or 2020?
I was gonna say that might also be I guess relevant to them because they kind of like lived through it. Like when you talk about JFK, Vietnam, these are things hitting close to home for you. These are things like they would literally see here. We're in a heavy red area, so they hear all sorts of things. So
Sure.
that might be an interesting segue.
No, absolutely. Because I basically kind of mash up the 2016, 2020, and QAnon chapters because they're all interrelated, no question. And you get the extra special bonus that I'm an election judge in a precinct in Pennsylvania, so I got to see that election firsthand. Oh yeah, and I had people with ballots in hand wanting to show me YouTube channels so I could watch them before they voted to prove that it was all fake. Yeah, we're a weird country, I'll tell you that much. But yeah, we muddled through. Yeah, let's talk about QAnon a little, I guess, because that definitely is alive and well in both elections and right now. I think one of the features that I discovered in doing all this was that people love to create scapegoats, and people like to attribute, actions to these kind of mysterious, powerful, and very kind of morally degenerate elites. That's a really common theme in all this. So when you talk about the Rothschilds, they're definitely going to be lumped into this. The Illuminati, the Masonic lodges, the Rotarians. I mean, literally anybody who volunteers to do anything could be part of this. And I think it gets a lot of traction because it gives people what amount to a crusade. I think it's one way for people to give themselves agency and basically the sense that they're morally better than the problem they're trying to solve. I see that a lot. QAnon's just weird though, because it's very recent. I mean, it's built on a lot of the roots of stuff I've just talked about that you could go back to, like, the protocols of the Elders of Zion and anti-Semitic campaigns. But it, of all places, and you probably know this, it appeared on a message board. I mean, it was on 4chan by this point, about 4 or 5 years ago. And it's portraying, elites at war with each other, basically. That among the elites, there's a civil war going on. You've got the evil pedophiles trying to take over the world, and you have the good elites fighting them. And you guys obviously, I mean, I'll ask you this. Do you know who generally, people assign the Q to, who they think Q is? And this goes back to like 2018, 2019, that ballpark. You know generally who they think Q is? It's Donald Trump. I mean, they really think it's him. One of the things I love about the internet is because you could take something down from YouTube, but it never goes away. You know that, right? Yeah. You get onto the old time machine and you can find anything. So one of the videos I found for the book was a 2017 version of Marjorie Taylor Greene explaining QAnon, right? And I have it. I have the link. It's in the book too. I've watched it a bunch of times. And that's what she thought. That's what she was portraying about 4 years ago. To say, well, it's him. I mean, he's the guy fighting the good fight. Once we win, we'll have mass arrests and all the bad people will go to Guantanamo. You've got his former national security advisor, Michael Flynn. I mean, a 3-star general who made the QAnon pledge during the 2020 election. I talked to a guy who teaches officers, and I asked him, how did this guy get a security clearance? I mean, he did. You know, he was in the inner circle of the White House national security structure for a while. I guess the question I always ask myself is, why is this so popular during an election, right? Why is it such a useful thing? I think it helps motivate people. I think by pointing out good and evil, it gives them a cause. It puts them on the right side. I think it's a good vehicle to give, you know, a sense of power. And I think that's a very important thing for anybody who really considers themselves to lack that power. I'll give you an example of that. You guys heard of the QAnon shaman? Have you heard of that guy?
He's hilarious.
What's that?
He's hilarious. I love him.
Yeah, I actually, you know, I did a deep dive on him. I'm thinking, why in God's name is this guy wearing a horned helmet? And you know, you saw him, you know what he looks like.
The guy with the face paint, right?
Yeah, yelling and screaming. I mean, if you actually listen to the audio of him on January 6th, I mean, he's yelling war chants and doing all that stuff. But if you actually look at what he does, he's basically a new age spiritualist who's promising a way for people to empower themselves in the world. And again, you're giving somebody a way to give themselves agency, right? They can fight evil. They can make themselves important again. And I found that was really interesting. If you have people who live in Rust Belt communities who have been disenfranchised by, you know, global markets, who can't rely on employment security anymore. If you live in the Rust Belt like I did, I grew up in Eastern Pennsylvania. I grew up in a steel town, right? They want a way to fight back and give themselves some self-value. This is a hugely appealing thing, hugely appealing, right? So you got this kind of combination of all these things that appeal to this kind of new age men's movement, which is what the QAnon shaman is focused on. It's the same thing when you look at why yoga groups made up of suburban women join QAnon. It's exactly the same. You know, self-affirmation and self-help. This becomes one of the ways to do it. And a lot of the, you know, really interesting journalism on this is how quickly some of these, you know, Instagram groups become conspiracy hotbeds. You know, you start out with, you know, Downward Dog and you end up with QAnon. It's really weird. But what I think it's doing is tapping into that same need. And I think what politicians have done is found out that this is what, you know, this is what gets the blood flowing. This is what gets people to rallies. It's very convenient as a political tool. And I think that's how it got into all this. If you look at the Pennsylvania governor's race, I'm sure you guys did. It was alive and well right there. Same thing with the, you know, parts of the other congressional races I saw in this state. And I don't think it's going away anytime soon because it's just so useful for a certain part of a base, you know, to cite that cause you could fight against. I think where it gets dangerous is the fact that a lot, you know, 99% of this stuff is not rooted in reality. I don't know if have you guys ever followed the Comet Ping Pong Pizza event in Washington? You know what I'm talking about?
You're talking about Pizzagate?
Yeah, is that related to Pizzagate?
Yeah, when the guy brought an assault rifle to a pizza parlor to look for, you know, enslaved children in the basement. And he shows up at, you know, these poor guys have been the subject of protests and attacks, and they don't even have a basement, right? But some genius decided that it was going to be, you know, their pizza menu is actually a menu for children, and just kind of, you know, used that kind of false, you know, correlation approach that, you know, was really it kind of devolved into a really serious police problem. You know, that was kind of your warning sign for January 6th, because people want to act on their convictions, right? And that's what we got. The guy got arrested, but the idea didn't die. I mean, there's actually been a lot of incidents like that in the country. That's the one we know, but that's not the only one. So I think that's where you find this stuff in politics, because it has a value. I guess I'll leave it at that. And you know what happens when people in authority embrace these ideas? They amplify them, right? You know that from being students in class. You kind of take your cues from your faculty, if they say it, it must be right. I mean, they have a lot of responsibilities, but I think they treat them well. But if you just, blather on Twitter and you're a senator, people will listen to that too. And that's the problem. When they make a claim, they have to have the evidence, and they don't always worry about that second part. I think that's where we have, the politics of today are defined by that gap sometimes. All right, I'm definitely talking way too much. Please dive right in.
So Pizzagate is a bit wacky to me.
Yeah.
It's a bit crazy because it's a very strange situation. Because this gentleman, this good man, who is fighting for those trapped pizza children, if he truly believes what he is doing is correct, he would be a monster not to do anything.
Right.
But at the same time, children trapped in the basement of a pizza place. But he genuinely believes it. So I don't know what to think. I don't know what to think of him. Is he a hero for trying to take those children away from their pasta sauce making dungeon, or well,
It's a philosophy experiment.
it is. It's a Rorschach test. It's a pizza grease Rorschach test.
Nice. I'm gonna steal that metaphor, just so you know.
You better credit me. I want royalties on that now.
Never gonna happen.
All right.
Luckily, we're not recording this, so there's no evidence.
Yeah.
I know, I'm kidding. I'll give you an example like this. I had dinner with a friend of mine who teaches accounting. So this guy deals in numbers constantly. That's all he does. And he kept telling me that, Republicans should steal elections as much as Democrats and make it even. And I said, what is that based on? What possible evidence do you have? And he finally admitted he didn't have any, but he really believed it. Therefore, it was real. And I think that's where you can take a moral action, but it has to be based on something, based on substance, right? It's not just, this guy's guilty of suspicion. That's usually not how it works. I just can't randomly tell students they're cheaters if I have no evidence of it. Well, you look like a cheater. Well, that's not going to fly, right? I mean, that's basic, common sense. But so, yeah, I think the moral litmus test, that Rorschach test, which is an awesome metaphor, I got to tell you, it's got to have a substantive foundation. I mean, I keep coming back to it. It's got to be real. The chapter I wrote on 9/11, when we talk about the buildup for the war, if we're going to send a nation into a conflict in 2003 and lives are at stake, you damn well better have proof, right? Because a lot of things changed after 9/11, including my life. I deployed in 2006. I went over there. So whether it's personal or policy, that's a pretty good rule of thumb in my book. So hope that makes sense. What other questions you folks have?
I think the 2020 election is really interesting. Like, there's like more broad, less evidence-based claims, but one pretty easy one to prove, I think, is the Hunter Biden laptop story and how that was hidden on every kind of centrist or left-wing news network. That was just hidden until after the election to get Biden president. Like,
could you repeat that? Because it's coming through garbled again. I'm sorry.
He was saying that how the Hunter Biden laptop story was censored through like media and social media. It was the FBI, correct? Like kind of talking to executives to say, hey, there's no evidence, so don't put this out there.
well, even if that part didn't happen, it's just true that they did hold on to it for a long time to put the elections after.
So he was saying it's sort of like that's rigging it for Biden because they didn't have that information out there.
Yeah, I mean, you go back to any instance where you've got official power or official information interacting with media, right? It's like the dance of who gets what first, right? And how a leak might go and how you can control the narrative as best you can. The FBI is interesting at that moment because you've got, reluctance to give the media anything. It's the opposite of what Comey did in 2016 when if you ever read the letter he released right before the election, it doesn't say anything except that they're still, investigating Hillary Clinton. So, yeah, I mean, there's a huge impact that an institution like that can have. If you're going to get into reasons why, that's going to take time. Why they did that with the Hunter Biden laptop, I honestly don't know. I think that's going to be a major story driving a lot of the political narrative next year. There's absolutely no question about that. I also think, though, if you look at the special prosecutor that started up under Trump, that guy's been active now for almost 2 years, and he's produced 2 acquittals. So it's not like they haven't had scrutiny of this. One of the things I like to look at always is what the courts are able to see in terms of evidence, because that's the kind of the best litmus test for evidence. That's why, we didn't talk about Rudy Giuliani and the Four Seasons Landscaping Company, but mother of God, when you lose in court 60 times over claims like that, that's not a good trend. We'll see about the Biden laptop, though. That's for next year for sure.
Go ahead, Lily.
I just had a question. Isn't it true that in Georgia they found a truck full of votes and they claimed it was an election fraud? How would the truck have even gotten Georgia first?
All right, I cut part of that. You're talking about election fraud in Georgia?
They found the votes in Georgia in a truck, I believe. How would the truck have even gotten there? Why would the votes get in the first place?
So one of the things I watched over the summer was the Dinesh D'Souza movie, 6,000 Mules. And I learned a lot about Georgia and absentee ballots and drop boxes and things like that. Yeah, I guess the best way I can answer that is, I would look at the specific claim about those types of ballots, and I would love to get into exactly what the claims were, date, time, place, and then just start kind of, deconstructing that to figure out what the claim was. So what exactly are they saying happened? That you had like a ballot dump in Georgia?
Not really sure, but they did find a truck or something in Georgia, and they brought it up at some committee or something.
See, that's where you want to get into when we start up with this discussion, like who they are, what, exactly where the information's from, things like that. Because these claims, they fly back and forth. I mean, they're happening right now in Arizona and actually Pennsylvania. We got a county that's refusing to certify. I'm not sure why, but you always want to get into the details. That's really important. So I don't have a hard answer for that one, but I would definitely need to know more.
We have about less than a minute for the recording, but if you're okay, we could just keep going for any student questions. It just wouldn't record.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Sophie.
Do you believe that Epstein killed himself?
Good question.
I didn't hear it. I'm sorry.
Do you believe that Epstein killed himself?
Oh. So what I have to say is I have to go with the evidence. That's what I have to go with. I can't go with suspicions. That's a great one though, because obviously the high stakes involved, right? Yeah, I don't know.